Welcome to the Industrial IoT Spotlight, your number one spot for insight from industrial IoT thought leaders who are transforming businesses today. With your host, Eric Walenza.
Welcome back to the Industrial IoT Spotlight podcast. I'm your host, Eric Walenza, CEO of IoT One, the consultancy that helps companies create value from data to accelerate growth. And our guest today is Tarun Gupta, co-founder and chief product officer at Skylo Technologies. Skylo provides cost-effective coverage from space across the entire globe by building an ecosystem of satellite operators, cellular providers, and technology partners. In this talk, we discussed IoT and consumer use cases for satellite that are already mature today, as well as the trends that will continue to drive adoption in the coming years. We also explored the importance of simplicity as end users begin to expect universal connectivity without worrying about new hardware or service contracts. If you find these conversations valuable, please leave us a comment and a 5-star review. And if you'd like to share your company's story or recommend a speaker, you can email us at team@iot1.com. Finally, if you have an IoT research strategy or training initiative that you'd like to discuss, please email me directly at erik.walenza@iot1.com. Thank you.
Tarun, thanks for joining us on the podcast today.
Thank you, Eric. Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Great. Yeah. And this is always an interesting topic for me. I've hosted a couple other companies in the tech space. And by space, I mean, space
Yeah.
in the past year or so. And it's always fascinating, right? Because I think it's something that's really evolved really just over the past decade or so. When did you start becoming aware or kind of interested in this domain?
I've been actually interested in space for quite a while. Back in high school, back before electricity, basically, I was involved with satellite communications. So we did a bunch of C-band communications, but to geostationary satellites. And, satellite has kind of gone from being in favor and the hottest thing to kind of going away and then back and forth and whatnot. And so recently, though, satellite has come back in favor and become really the new technology, because cellular is pretty much built out. Cellular has been around for, since the mid 80s or so, depending on where you are. And you find that cellular coverage is frankly actually shrinking in a lot of cases because 5G requires higher bandwidth, higher frequencies, and therefore the cell sizes go down. And what people don't recognize is as cell sites go down, what you find is you have to do, because it's an R² type of problem, you need 4x the number of cell sites to cover that same area. And because of that, people kind of expect ubiquitous coverage. They expect coverage wherever they go. I have a cell phone, I expect coverage. I expect it to want to work wherever I am. And therefore, satellite really becomes the default option because it's the most cost effective. It really becomes the solution that is, ubiquitous and already there, frankly, and people don't recognize it.
Interesting. So it is actually cost effective. So cost effective under what circumstances, for what type of bandwidth or use cases? And
so that part's evolving as well. So you look at new constellations and new applications like Starlink and Kuiper and those things, and you find that in rural markets, getting a high-speed broadband type of service makes a lot of sense, or that $100 a month type deal. And I think that's a brand new application that, again, wasn't there probably even 5 years ago. And you're seeing this greater and greater adoption. When you look at sort of covered areas, I'll call it, or where people are traditionally using satellite services, you look at two things. One is you look at a very, very expensive connectivity from a device standpoint. So devices that cost a couple of hundred to thousands of dollars. And you look at very, very high dollar per bit scenario. So, you're looking at satellite coverage and satellite ARPUs of basically $50 to $100 a month. Whereas now, when you look at standardized technologies, standardized 3GPP services, you're looking at satellite-based solutions that could frankly be in pennies per transmission.
And is this transformation of maybe the cost structure, also connectivity availability, is this just happening over the past 5 years, or when did this transition really start to make an impact in the market?
It's starting to come out now. I think what you're finding is that recently, within the last 12 months, you see the 3GPP has certified what they call Release 17. And Release 17 is this hybrid mix between cellular and satellite or NTN, non-terrestrial networks, and really the combining of the two entities and the two forces. So you had this world of cellular that was billions of devices per year spread across cell phones, IoT devices, trackers, kind of all these things that were happening. And you had the satellite industry industry, which was really measured in the thousands of devices per year. And when you bring the scale and sort of the magnitude of the cellular ecosystem into the satellite ecosystem, what you find is you're able to leverage the cost structure of not just the hardware, but then you begin to leverage the benefits of spectral efficiency. You begin to leverage the benefits of sort of, I can use the same RAN, the same core, the same billing system, the same billing platforms, and recognize sort of the scale and the efficiencies that cellular has brought into the satellite world. So spectrum costs are spectrum costs, but when you look at sort of the entire ecosystem and what I'll call the TCO, the total cost of ownership, that's really bringing everything down.
Let's say I have a device, could be a track and trace device, could be maybe a pacemaker. And if I'm in the city, is it the case that it's then going to be connected to a telco network? But then if I get on a boat, I go into a forest, then it's kind of shifting over to satellite based on best connectivity, or how do those two?
Absolutely right, Eric. So, this is exactly what 3GPP was thinking about. So just like today, when you're at home with your cell phone, you're probably on Wi-Fi is my guess. So you're on Wi-Fi, you're doing your surfing, your whatever you're doing. And then when you leave your home and get onto the cellular network, it's kind of a seamless handoff. And so it's a handover onto the cellular network, and you as a user really don't see any change here. So just like when you're transitioning from Wi-Fi to cellular, you're looking at now transitioning from cellular to satellite. Now, from that standpoint, it's for you as a user, you kind of expect actually connectivity. And you kind of expect that you're connected. You don't really necessarily care how you're connected. You don't really care if you're on satellite or cellular or Wi-Fi or Bluetooth or some other mechanism. You just want to make sure you have that connectivity and you can be found when you want to be found, or you want to be connected wherever you are. So it's kind of interesting. My daughter, one of our daughters that does a lot of hiking and things, she's out in Yosemite, and she's like, "Dad, my Wi-Fi is down," when she's hiking. And it's like, well, so she equates sort of connectivity to Wi-Fi as opposed to, connectivity being 3G or 4G or 5G or anything else. So very similar in that regards.
It's funny. Different expectations for different generations.
That's right. That's right.
And I guess if I'm switching from Wi-Fi to 5G, I might have a better connectivity with one or the other. And actually, it probably depends a little bit on the case. If I'm switching from my 4G network and then I'm switching over to satellite, am I going to expect an immediate change in terms of the service level, or is that going to be relatively smooth?
I think about it in two buckets. One is sort of the consumer bucket, and one is sort of the IoT bucket. And if you look at IoT bucket in terms of track and trace, location sharing, sending an hourly or a minute, every 10-minute status on the temperature or humidity, you're not going to notice any difference because you're sending an IoT packet. And that IoT packet is a 50, 100 byte packet or something like that, and not really real time. The NTN, the non-terrestrial network satellite type of services that are there today are really around IoT type of applications and small use cases. So it's not really meant for satellite communication for Netflix, as an example. So if you're watching YouTube or Netflix and you're at home and you kind of go out to the middle of some national park, you're probably not going to have the same experience on satellite because it's not designed for that yet. So I would say the satellite connectivity to a device is very much like the 1G services for cellular. And then eventually you'll find as new constellations come up and the ecosystem comes up with new spectrum, new powerful satellites, sort of better frequency planning, and moving from geostationary to medium Earth orbit to low Earth orbit. You're finding higher capacities and a higher bit rate and sort of a lower cost structure is what you'll find that. But that'll take some time. That'll take the entire infrastructure to be upgraded. It just won't happen. But specifically today, again, depending on your use case, from a cell phone side, if you're texting, you probably won't find any difference. But if you're watching any sort of broadband or even medium band type services, satellite won't support that today.
Let's take a step back, and
sure,
before we get into what Skylo is doing, I'm interested in how you personally made the decision to co-found the company. So you have an interesting background. You were the chief architecture of Fiber Tower until about a decade ago, and then you joined Parallel Infrastructure, building telecom infrastructure services. And then most recently, you were head of strategy and ops for Google Fiber. So clearly you have a lot of experience more in the terrestrial network here. What was it that I guess looks like it was about 2.5, 3 years ago that you co-founded Skylo? What was it that led you personally to decide this is a mission you want to take on?
Eric, is interesting. It's a great question, and sometimes I find myself asking the same thing every day. but I'll tell you, I've been fortunate enough to come through some pretty pivotal times in our industry. And so the first one was when I first graduated from college, I was part of the first PCS rollout as part of California. So I helped build the first PCS network here. And I remember thinking to myself at that time, like, who wants a cell phone? I have a great landline. It works well. I'll wait 10 minutes till I drive home and be able to call whoever needed to call or something. And only after did we deploy the network and it became sort of popular and ubiquitous and people began to really adopt the service did I realize the fundamental shift that happened around the cellular industry and what it could really do. You went from just voice to becoming to SMS, and then it became, the Apple launched their phone with the App Store and did all sorts of brand new ways for people to communicate and interact with the wireless-based network. So that was very eye-opening for me. And then when I left sort of the cellular side of the business, went over to Google, and when I was part of the Google Fiber, at that time we launched gigabit fiber to the home. And I remember at that time thinking, again, I had 30 megabits to the house, 40 megabits to the house. Why do I need something different? And I remember being in meetings and people would be like, why do we want a gigabit? That's ridiculous. No one will ever need it. And you can't even use that much or whatnot. And as we deployed our first network in Kansas City, we were running out of gigabit to the house because people had multiple 4K TVs and they had cameras and they had all sorts of use cases that were pretty interesting. And people from the industry, whether it was the telco providing DSL or whether it was, the cable TV or the cable provider providing DOCSIS type services, it was like, you don't need this service. But when we began to see the uptick and really created this floor for all new fiber, all new deployments, I mean, my parents now who are in their 80s have gigabit to their house. And it's interesting because it was the second sort of shift that I saw just transformationally about how telecom networks were really fundamentally changing how people were living their lives. And then sort of what happened a couple of years ago back when I was talking to the co-founders at the time, at my partners here at Skylo, we recognized that connectivity was kind of taken for granted. And you realize that people want connectivity wherever they are. I mean, whether they can choose to turn it off or whatever they want to do, but we recognize that cell networks were kind of not continuing to expand. There's a lot of infill and a lot of small cells and a lot of capacity and all those things that were happening, but no one was talking about, well, what do we do outside of cell coverage? And granted, people are like, and it's very interesting to me when you hear the major operators, cellular operators today, they talk about, hey, we have 99% coverage or 98% coverage. And they talk about people. They don't ever talk about geography. And, you think about areas that over the water, they'll never have coverage, as an example, from a cellular-based system, because you can't put a cell site in the middle of the ocean. And so, this was a fundamental shift for us to think about how can you provide connectivity to where cellular doesn't make cost sense. And how do you make sure that people always are connected because people take connectivity for granted? When, again, I go back to my daughters when they're hiking or they're out or wherever they are, they're like, Dad, the Wi-Fi is down. And it occurs to me that they just expect coverage. They expect their phone to work wherever they are, frankly. And this was one where we were pretty excited about bringing that cellular cost model, that cellular infrastructure into the satellite world on a standards basis that would allow people to communicate, frankly, how they're used to communicating today without any change of behavior.
Yeah. No, it's interesting, right? So there's this expectation, and then there's a whole set of industries that have just been underserved, right? If you're talking about mining, agriculture, fisheries, shipping, logistics, even in an airplane, right? I mean, you're paying a fair bit of money and a lot of, I haven't been on an airplane probably in 4 years. I've been stuck here in China. So maybe I'm out of the loop here, but that was always a pain point of getting on an airplane and saying, okay, how am I going to manage to get connected for the next 5 hours?
Yeah, I mean, well, sometimes on a plane, that's the way to get away from people, but I completely agree. I mean, I remember, I've been, unfortunately, in this quite a while, but I remember picking hotels because they had free Wi-Fi. I mean, because you need that ability to connect and you want that ability to connect. And again, I completely agree. I mean, it's interesting to me when we look at the use cases that exist. I think about, like, we've been approached by people who want to track cattle, as an example, want to track sheep, want to do methane sensors out in the middle of middle of where they're drilling for oil, as an example. So it's very surprising to me the use cases that are coming out as a result of having this connectivity. And again, it's not what I find is it's not necessarily the broadband side of it. It's that same cellular evolution where they're talking about, hey, now that I have connectivity, what can I do with it? I had a customer come to me, or a potential customer come to me a couple of months ago, wanting to talk about measuring the inclination of every power pole in a state. Because, as a power pole is starting to lean over, that's how, power lines fall down, cause fires, et cetera, cause human safety issues. So this is a pretty interesting use case for me because, again, it's a couple of bits, bytes a month saying, hey, here's my location, I'm still at the right angle, et cetera. Again, new uses come out that I hadn't even considered. I didn't even think was a problem until people are bringing it up.
Yeah. So I guess there's a few ways that we could approach, kind of looking at this business. Maybe we can take it first from the business standpoint, and then
Sure.
and then get into the tech stack separate. But from a business standpoint, what does it? I mean, obviously, you have a long tail of industries and potential companies that could use this, right? So it's going to be very diversified on the industry side. But then, because of that, you have probably a challenge as a business, right? If you know these are my 20 customers and they all have the same use case, that's one key account way of selling. And I imagine that's not going to necessarily be the case in a lot of situations here. You're going to have, niche use cases that might end up being somewhat small, or, small businesses, farmers and so forth. And you have a solution that to them might appear quite technically complicated. When you think about, satellite connectivity, you don't think simple. How do you deliver this as a product to customers in a way that it's easy for them to roll out?
Yeah, that's a great question, and that's a lot of it was a lot of meetings we had back and forth internally, a lot of discussions, and it's interesting when you think about our customers today. And we made a conscious decision not to go after, for example, the farmer or go after the utility. Our view is to go after someone who's servicing that person today, or that end consumer, or that customer today. So, for example, our customers are the MVNOs or the MNOs, or people that have an IoT service today. And frankly, we're augmenting their cellular connectivity with satellite, or we're supplementing their cellular connectivity with satellite. So, for example, like again, if a utility has 1 million power poles in the state, I'm not trying to go in and say, hey, let's replace all 1 million with satellite. I'm going to their existing customers, the existing providers they have today, and saying, hey, for example, AT&T, let me supplement you with an NTN service that you can go to your customer and provide a 100% solution. So think about us as an insurance plan. Think about us as a safety blanket that goes over everything they can offer when cellular doesn't exist, as an example. So for us, I'm not trying to, and the good news is, because these are existing cellular devices that with a firmware upgrade can do satellite, these customers or these users already have a connectivity need. So I'm not going in and re-educating anybody. I'm not going in and saying, hey, buy a different platform. I'm not saying, hey, go in and buy a different device or a different GUI or a different interface. It's their same chipset, same device, same use cases with a software upgrade. Again, this 3GPP release 17 that allows them to integrate with what they do today. And again, they don't really care. The user doesn't care if they're on Wi-Fi, cellular, or satellite. They have connectivity. It's just one less thing they have to worry about.
Okay, that's interesting. So from the user perspective, nothing's changing in terms of the hardware, software interface. Even their relationship with their vendors not changing.
That's right. Yeah.
And what you're doing is you're kind of getting a service level up from, let's say, 85% to 99%, or you're filling some kind of gap on the service level side.
That's right. And if you think about that, a little bit, as we sort of hear back from customers, it's interesting because what they're saying is, wait a minute, now I don't need to have 2 sets of spares in my truck, one for satellite, one for cellular. I don't have to have 2 sets of training manuals, one for satellite, one for cellular. I don't need to have 2 relationships, one, again, for satellite, one for cellular. I just have to have one relationship that I can expand. So it's very interesting. When we talk to MNOs, one of the biggest complaints that they get, or the feedback they get from their customers is, hey, you don't have coverage where I need you to have coverage. This allows our customers, the MNOs and MVNOs, to frankly expand coverage with zero CapEx. So they're able to go back to your point to say, hey, let me take your 80, 85% solution to 98, 99, or maybe even 100% solution. And other cases, they're opening up brand new verticals. So, for example, maritime. Cellular could never really go after maritime as a connectivity customer, but now they can. So think about all the shipping containers, all the shipping vessels, all the fishing vessels, as example. Think about all the fishing lives that are lost at sea. These are now customers that have access to connectivity where they can do SOS or track location or be notified in the event of a pending hurricane or tornado or whatever it ends up being. So absolutely.
And so then if we look at the tech stack here, you have the satellites. And my understanding is you're not launching satellites. You're using satellites that other companies are operating. So what does it look like to go from the satellite down to the farmer? What does that tech stack look like? And what layers are you then filling in there?
When I think about it, there's an entire ecosystem that Skylo has to create. And it's really, frankly, what we call an NTN alliance. And this NTN alliance traverses the entire value chain. And so when I say the entire value chain, think about it as from the device, from the user terminal, think about it as we're building and helping to make sure that the modem itself has 3GPP release 17 type of firmware. So the modem can support terrestrial as well as cellular as well as satellite type of communications. So the modem has the embedded firmware. We then work with the module vendor to certify the modules and do the same thing just like PTCRB does on the satellite side today. Then think about the OEM, from the OEM device, from IODT certification, and that sort of ecosystem has to make sure that is working and compliant with the Skylo network. Once that's there, that is transmitted to a satellite of what you said, we don't launch any satellites. We work with existing satellite partners. And the reason for that is, the main reason for that is the satellite companies are extremely, extremely good at designing satellites, launching satellites, operating satellites, frequency planning, power management, all those things that made them where they are today, those multi-billion-dollar organizations. So frankly, launching another satellite is A, quite expensive, B, has tremendous regulatory challenges, and C, is just another thing we'd have to do, which just doesn't make sense. So the way I think about the satellite operators, an integral part of the puzzle, but I think about them as the tower operators, where the cellular operators don't do anything on the real estate side, yet they own the RAN, the core, and the billing system. So the satellite operators to us are pure 100% partners, where we are working with them. We're bringing traffic to their network. We're bringing them a scale of devices that they hadn't seen before. Once the traffic goes up to the satellite, comes down to an existing ground station, again, already licensed, already manned, already has procedures, policies in place as to what you can touch, what you can't touch, kind of the right things from an operational perspective, lands on a Skylo base station, our eNode B, which is something that we have designed, developed, and we operate and maintain this. And this was because there is no Release 17 base station today. We have this. It's the first commercial vRAN that is in the marketplace. We integrate that to our network, and then that feeds into, frankly, a standard core. So our standard mobile core, and think about the mobile core in terms of, again, HSS and a P gateway and an S gateway and a SCEF and all the things that are how we interface to a mobile operator. So, when we talk about interfacing the traffic, and when you think about that farmer who says, hey, I don't know if my cow, let's say, is in a cellular covered area or on a satellite covered area, that traffic still has to flow back to their dashboard in their own way that they know how to act and use that data. We then integrate and use that traffic from our core to our MNO partners core, which then goes to the farmer. So we have, again, our own authentication. We have our own traffic handovers. So the way we work is literally we are a roaming partner to the mobile operators. No special handoffs, standard S6A interfaces, S8 interfaces, just things like that. So we are frankly a mobile operator whose network is in space from our space partners. Okay,
interesting. So you're a mobile operator. It sounds like you're building out the middleware to make all of this, kind of glue it together. And then also, you mentioned the importance of the ecosystem here, that you have all these other players that are kind of maybe providing value-added services or developing other solutions, and you're helping them to plug into this.
Right. So if you think about, again, the farmer, and the farmer has, again, a tag on their cattle, they're putting a SIM card on that tracker. We are a profile on that SIM card for that cow. And so when the cow roams, or when they're in cellular, they're on the cellular network, and when they're out of cellular, they roam. That device is scanning, it's searching for a network. It sees Skylo, it'll latch onto the Skylo network. So when you think about our ecosystem, it goes from the chipset side all the way to the SIM side. So Keegan is a great partner of ours, as we might have mentioned, and so this is our SIM partner, where we are an IMSI, and we would be on that device.
Yeah, great. Yeah, I had, I think it was the CEO of Keegan on here, probably a year or so ago. Yeah. Great company. You have quite a number of other partners. So, MediaTek, I guess that one's a bit intuitive. Druid, what are the different roles that these partners are playing in the ecosystem?
Yeah, so as we think about the NTN Alliance that we've created, again, it's the entire stack, and it's the entire, this ecosystem here is really, everyone has to play together. So again, and the good news is, for the large majority of the Skylo network, again, the RAN, the core, the pieces here, these are all cellular-based items and all cellular standardized items. So these are things that, there's a bit of build, a bit of buy. But when you look at Druid is our core provider today. So a great partner of ours. And again, when we go to our customers and say, hey, we have a 4G, 5G core, a standard core on how to interface, they're like, oh, we get it. We know how to interface with you. We know how to hand over traffic. We know how to get a billing record from you. We know how to understand how to get a bill, how to understand how much traffic we use. We understand roaming in that regard. So as we talk to our customers, because we're using these industry names that are well respected, there's frankly not a lot of conversation or education that needs to happen on the network side. It's very simple, standardized, all things that have been in place for the last, frankly, 20, 30 years.
Gotcha. Okay. Yeah, a few more details that I'm curious about here on the operating model. So coverage, I see online you have 13.6 million. I think I'm remembering that US is something like 2-point-something million square miles. So that makes me feel like you have, I don't know, what the Earth might be. What is it, like 100 million square miles in total or something like this?
Yeah, I think the good news, Eric, is like when we think about satellites, these are, and because the other benefit of, as I alluded to earlier, the benefit of using existing satellites with existing satellite partners is that they already have coverage. And one of the reasons we're going with geostationary satellites, frankly, is that 3 geostationary satellites cover the planet. So you don't need, when you read the press around Starlink or Kuiper, again, these new networks that are being launched, these are thousands upon thousands of satellites for that complete global coverage. From a geostationary standpoint, 3 satellites cover the globe. And so by partnering with the existing players, you're able to cover huge, huge swaths of land for, frankly, very little infrastructure. And because everything's in the cloud today, not only is it redundant, but it's a lot cheaper and a lot faster to deploy. So, you think about these large Earth stations, you think about these satellites, you're able to move into new geographies very, very quickly.
Gotcha. Okay. So a small set of existing infrastructure already provides most coverage that you would need. Hardware, we touched on this already, so no hardware updates. What percentage of existing hardware on the market would you expect to be compatible with today? Because I guess there's going to be some legacy stuff that it's less likely you're compatible with, and then maybe things that are being put in devices and shipped today, much more likely that you're compatible. But what does that portfolio look like across the market?
That's the other great news about going with the standardized technology. So we are going, because again, we're using standards-based infrastructure and standards-based, this Release 17 devices. These are all using existing chips that are made today, using a standard NB-IoT protocol. So when you think about those devices, again, it depends on the device, depends on the application and the use case and whatnot. But theoretically, those devices can be upgraded over the air in the field. So, for example, again, there's a lot of nuances there, but we have taken multiple devices designed for cellular, and whether they're a track and trace device, whether it's a wearable, for example, we've been able to, with a firmware upgrade, connect those over satellite. So no change in hardware today. So when you think about sort of NB-IoT as a protocol and NB-IoT as a chipset sort of modem, basically, those are made in the scale of, in the next couple of years will be more than 1 billion a year. That's the type of scale of devices we're talking about that we can bring onto the satellite network. Those, if they're upgraded, again, via over-the-air firmware or even in a warehouse or whatever they are, those can be satellite enabled.
Gotcha. Okay, good. So, a significant portion of the hardware coming out of the market will be
things that are already there or coming out in the future. Absolutely.
And then the pricing model on your website, it seems very transparent and clear. $6 a month for every connected device. Is that a default for every device, or does it end up mattering a lot on the bandwidth or other variables?
So Skylo, we're a network service provider. So we provide a network service. So think about us as a Vodafone, as an AT&T, as a Verizon or whatnot, where you are paying for the amount of bandwidth that you use. So what we find is that, and the way we work today is because we work through MNOs and MVNOs, is we actually are a wholesale model to them. And they would then provide packages or price plans to their end customers or their end subscribers. And so the reason we put out that figure on our website is because it's less around the fact that it's $6 or $4 or $10 or whatever it is, but more to help communicate that we are in a low single-digit dollar per month ARPU type of environment where people can add satellite at a fraction of the cost of what they're traditionally used to. Because people typically think about satellite and they think about, oh my gosh, this is $100 a month for this type of connectivity and then plus hardware, plus these types of devices, or plus these other types of costs. But this was helped to really set the stage that, look, we are affordable for your types of connectivity types of solutions. Now, because we offer a wholesale package to MVNO customers or our customer base, we recognize that they have different ways that they can price to their end customers. So, for example, they might be able to say, or when I say they, I mean our customers might say, look, if they have 1 million subscribers or a customer with 1 million devices, they might say, look, we're going to add 5 cents to every single device, and you have the ability to use satellite or not. And that way they treat it like an insurance package or some sort of amortization. Or they can go back and say, well, or you can log into your portal and click this one for satellite and this one for just cellular only. And then they can choose to do another way to price it. So, we've seen our customers do and package pricing models very differently because they have different customers with different needs. And so our desire is to be as transparent as possible and be as flexible as possible for our customers, for their end subscribers.
Yeah, that makes sense. That model makes sense. I think it's useful for folks to have an understanding of the ballpark, because then they can build a business case around that and say, let's assume it's $6. But in the end, your distributors or your partners are going to have a business model in place and they're going to work around that.
Yeah, I mean, look, on customers that are energy, for example, or they're measuring, we talked about the inclination of a power line or a power pole. Frankly, that's probably a heartbeat a day. And then if there's an alert because the pole is greater than a certain angle, then send an alarm. So those types of applications are probably maybe 10 pings a month or some variant like that. I mean, that's definitely wouldn't be $6. It would be much cheaper than that. But again, I think that what we're trying to do is make sure that we want to make sure that people can adopt this service as rapidly as possible and without any friction, because as you begin to require or force a change in behavior, then people aren't going to adopt it. So we want to make sure that people have a frictionless way to adopt satellite connectivity, just like roaming or anything else.
Yeah, makes sense. I mean, this I feel like is really a critical element of a lot of IoT value propositions right now is how do you take technology that's been built up and is kind of, arriving at a certain level of maturity, but how do you make it so simple that people can just integrate it into an existing behavior, existing process?
Yeah, people shouldn't have to think about, what's the cost justification for this? Is $2 too much money? Is $10 too much money? I mean, clearly, when you look at cellular-based IoT pricing, one of the reasons that it's just frankly so low is because those networks are subsidized by the billions of people paying, or at least in the US, 200 million people paying $50 a month, for that type of service. So that's one of the reasons why IoT pricing is just so low. And as IoT continues to really expand and grow at a really rapid pace here, you want to make sure that people or devices are connected. And frankly, you almost erase the line between how is it connected to am I connected or not.
So if we look out into the next 12 months, next 24 months, this is still a very rapidly evolving ecosystem of technology providers. What is on the roadmap for you? What are you excited about, either for your company directly or just in the ecosystem as a whole?
When we started the company, several years ago, our focus was on IoT. And it was interesting because what we found was there was and frankly, this was my days at Fiber that taught me this or showed me this, and cellular. But what you recognize is where telecom companies typically deploy is to those people that can afford it. And it makes sense, right? You're going to invest $1, and where do you want the best return for that dollar? And so you began to create this divide between the people that could afford bandwidth and the people that couldn't. And so what you found were the communities that could afford gigabit fiber or could afford the first 5G networks were the people that had, higher income, as an example, that could afford those types of services. And then only over time did the people in the lower income brackets get those services over, just as the networks began to build and sort of cost justify themselves. What we wanted to do was turn that around a little bit and make sure that everyone had access to ubiquitous cost structures and ubiquitous technology so they could take advantage of, lower cost of compute, the drop in silicon prices and making sure that they had the ability to take advantage of cloud compute and, again, efficiencies in the marketplace. And so over the next 12 to 18 months, I kind of see two different work streams that are happening. And it kind of goes back to IoT is one. And IoT, I think you'll see just a tremendous growth on IoT services because, again, you see this rapid, precipitous drop in costs and compute and those types of things, and better business models and better business efficiencies and AI and how people can learn from the data. But what's also very interesting to me now is finding this frankly, coming out of nowhere for me was this growth in the consumer space. And this is largely led by Apple and the iPhone 14 about how that device can connect to satellite. So how that consumer device connecting to satellite today is frankly giving everyone on the planet who has an iPhone 14 a lifeline in the event of an emergency. And that feature has probably been out for 4 months now, and we've already seen, half a dozen or so lives saved as a result of it. So I think over the next 12 to 18 months, I would be surprised if you didn't see probably the next, 100 million smartphones that come out or more that don't have satellite connectivity. They're going to have it. Like if you have the choice between picking a cell phone with satellite connectivity or one without, it's very clear you're going to pick a cell phone with satellite connectivity, just even if you never needed to use the service because you want that backup. So I think what you'll find is IoT will continue to do as people expect it to do, but you'll see a tremendous growth in consumer devices today just because, frankly, people didn't know that technology existed.
And on the consumer side, do you expect it to be, for the foreseeable future, kind of an emergency backup in the case of some event that doesn't occur frequently? Or do you expect it to be people that are living in rural India or somewhere in, or rural America for that matter, just saying, I'm going to use this and 30% of the time I'm going to be using satellite because it's cost effective and otherwise I just don't have a good option? Are we going to reach that point?
I think this is no different to me than the first days of cellular, where people would buy a cell phone and put it in their glove box in their car and say, hey, I'm going to use it when I break down, as an example. And then I think over time they recognize that, wow, I can really use this thing as speeds got better, as cost structures got better, those types of things. People recognize that, hey, this could be my main phone, my main communication medium, and really replace my landline. I don't know if this will be used, frankly, for people that live in rural America that don't have access to internet today, because this is a low bandwidth messaging type of application or a message type of service. Over time, as you move to 5G NR or higher bandwidths, I think that'll happen. But Where I think this will end up being initially is a lifeline type of service, like SOS as an example, or tracking. Again, just to give you a personal anecdote here, the same daughter that she was working in Yosemite last summer, due to the fires that were happening here in California, she was evacuated from her house or from her location in Yosemite 3 different times. And so, my wife and I were literally at wit's end because we're watching on the news what is going on here. We didn't know where she was. We gave her, frankly, she had her phone. She had a SIM from one provider. We got her an eSIM from a second cell phone provider, in the US, and she still didn't have coverage. And so it was very difficult for her to know where she was. We were afraid. We were calling her, obviously didn't get through. We were texting her, didn't get through. We only knew where she was when she happened to go past the library that had Wi-Fi there. So, when I think about sort of the use cases, it absolutely is first and foremost a public safety thing. But I also think about, again, just standard communications. Hey, I'm safe. Hey, I'm okay. I look at this natural disaster, what's happening in Turkey as an example. I can look at the catastrophe that's going on. I think about the networks that are down. Just people being able to say, "Hey, I'm safe." That's huge, right? To say, "Hey, there's always things that are happening on the planet." Just a single ping is, "I'm okay." That I think that's the first sort of thing. The second thing that I see now is tracking. Again, for people that are hiking all day, or not all day, but people that are hiking as a recreation, people that are mountain biking, people that are out skiing, as an example, backcountry skiing, just, hey, once an hour, I'm safe or I'm okay. Just where are you, as an example? Why would, it's important when I think about backcountry hikers, not only do they register at the check-in point of where they are, but, the government should know, or the national park should know where they are at all times in the event that there's an issue. Hey, I know where to go. I don't have to go do the search and rescue or fly a helicopter for hours on end happen to find a red fabric out there. I can find to make sure that you're okay and you're tracked and we can make sure you're safe. I think about automatic detection. We are talking to a company today that wants to build satellite connectivity in the event, to a bicycle helmet in the event of a crash. I think about, in those scenarios where you don't have access to your cell phone because you're pinned or you're trapped or some situation like that. You want to make sure that there's an automatic alert. So there's a lot of these applications that'll come out, in my opinion. And what's really surprising to me is, again, we're just, I think, starting to scratch the surface of what you can do once you have connectivity, even though it's a narrowband type of application today.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, my wife would definitely put one of these in my son's shoes, maybe just in his arm, if
right.
she get a battery that small.
Right.
Yeah. No, great. Tarun, I think we've gotten a good bit of understanding of the business here. Is there anything that we haven't touched on that's important for folks to understand?
I think people have an interesting view of thinking about, when you think about cellular, I think people think that, people kind of forget where we were and how we got to where we are. And so people are like, oh my gosh, this doesn't work for me because I can't surf Netflix or surf YouTube or whatever it ends up being. But people need to recognize that this is a journey. This is sort of step one. It's a tremendous shift of what's going on in the industry of having this dual mode cellular end-to-end type of service. People need to recognize that the industry is just now starting to mobilize around this hybrid infrastructure and really not think about, cellular or satellite, but really think about both. And I think for me, it's the question people should be asking is, do you want connectivity? Yes or no? Not really, how do I want connectivity? And because the applications are going to come. I mean, I think, again, 10 years ago or before the iPhone, maybe 2007 or so, I think the phone was largely a talking type of application, but now it really does so many more things. I don't see this as any different. I'll give you, I talked to somebody a couple of months ago. He was saying, it was interesting. He locked his keys in his car, obviously. And then because he was in an area where there's no cell phone, he couldn't call the service center to unlock the car. He had to get his car towed 5 miles to inside cellular coverage just to get the car unlocked. So when you think about some sort of satellite connectivity, that's something you could have done by pressing a button. I mean, it's really remarkable to me that what people can do when they have connectivity. And, it's just, it's remarkable. And I'm excited to be part of the transformation that's happening here.
Yeah, no, this will be exciting to watch. I mean, I'm very confident that the use cases are there because I'm interviewing people all the time on the podcast that have use cases around, track and trace and all these different situations where there's basically a gap in the model. So it'd be interesting to see, to continue to track Skylo over the coming years. Maybe I can have you on the podcast in another year or two and we can see where we are as an industry there. But Tarun, thanks for taking the time today. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, Eric. Looking forward to it. I appreciate the opportunity.
Thanks for tuning in to another edition of the Industrial IoT Spotlight. Don't forget to follow us on Twitter at IoT1HQ and to check out our database of case studies on IoT1.com. If you have unique insight or a project deployment story to share, we'd love to feature you on a future edition. Write us at eric.walenza@IoT1.com.